And it just became too overwhelming of a battle. I wasn't comfortable with any of this. I just wanted to be myself and fly under the radar and not make anyone uncomfortable because that makes me uncomfortable. Um, and they just never respected that. So I ended up leaving sophomore year to get my GED, of which it took me 5 years to actually accomplish, just because I had medical issues. And of course, from having my whole development messed with and the trajectory it sent me down in life, um, I had depression and emotional issues. I never got better from this being done to me. It really just made my life very, very difficult. So yeah, I didn't actually complete high school until just this last year when I finally got my GED.
My guest today is Jonni Skinner. He was put on estrogen at age 13 because he was effeminate and gay and subject to social influences. A gender clinician told him that he would be happier as a woman than as a gay man because he would be able to have a husband. Jonni is now 23 years old and lives with the consequences of his medicalization. Jonni, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for having me.
We met at GenSpect, so I have heard you tell your story. You've also told it elsewhere, but for our audience that is just getting to hear you for the first time, would you please start by telling us about who you were before you medicalized?
Yeah. So as a small child, I had a diagnosis for Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism at, I believe, 3 or 4, very young. Um, so I went to like a specialized school before I was able to enter into kindergarten. And I was always in like special ed groups growing up. I was in and out of therapy already. So I was already very familiar with like the medicalized world, as it were. Um, and I was also just a very non-conforming kid. As a little kid, like when I would play house with my friends, I would always want to pretend like I had a husband or I would like hold hands with boys, very atypical things that in my one red light town that I grew up in, people were not, both adults and other kids were not very open to, just because the culture in that time in the 2000s was not, in the 2000s in the Midwest, they were not really open to gender nonconforming kids, especially boys. So I dealt with a lot of discrimination growing up, a lot of prejudice. I would be like punished a lot at school if I showed, atypical interests, like wanting to play dress up, or if I, expressed an interest in like female pop stars, things of that variety. Um, and this had eventually led me to being very isolated and just a very sad, depressed kid, um, which is what eventually had led me into my medicalization.
You encountered online influences and you had a friend who was transitioning. So there was social influence. And you've talked about the environment that you were in that just did not accept this nonconformity. So talk about how you discovered the idea of transition, because it did not come naturally.
Yeah. So I had first discovered it through the internet because I had seen, some of the makeup gurus that I had followed that were male were beginning their transition in like 2000, towards the end of 2014, 2015, and into 2016. Um, so they were beginning to transition and talking about how much it bettered their lives, how much less prejudice they faced as feminine men because, they passed as women, how they felt more loved by men, like it was easier for them to find like romance and a partner, because they didn't have this like pressure to change their personality essentially. Um, and then the only other gay person that I have ever known in person was my tutor, who was a child of a family friend, so she was a family friend. Um, and she was my math tutor, for a while and had begun transitioning from female to male. For similar reasons, she had faced discrimination our whole life. She was bullied for being butch. People would pick on her looks. Um, People were really, really awful to her growing up, and she fell into this under the idea that it would benefit her life if she was able to present as a straight man because she could fly under the radar. She wouldn't have the same amount of prejudice. People wouldn't pick on her for her looks so much because she would just be like a normal guy. Um, our our doctor, because she was the one that got me the referral to the doctor I eventually seen, had also told her that if she was on testosterone, um, her weight would go down because it would convert all into muscle. So there were some similar reasons that she had gotten caught up in this, some different reasons, but I would ask her questions about it because I was seeing some of the people I had followed online, some of these YouTubers were beginning their transition. I had, of course, found Jazz Jennings as well, who was who's a very well-known child transitioner. And just with the way that these people described how they felt, not feeling happy in their body or their social role, and feeling feminine and the world not accepting them for it. So then they did this, and then the world all of a sudden was very accepting. That was very appealing to me as, an uncomfortable 12, 13-year old. That was sort of how the social influence began. And I remember I came out to my mom in February of 2016 and I had said, I think I might be transgender. Um, and that was what eventually led to me getting the referral to the doctors that I saw, who just affirmed everything that I told them, my insecurities, my fears, about like growing up into a gay man, or my feelings of being gay as being kind of icky or sinful. They just affirmed all of that and presented transitioning as a way out of that, as a way to live like a normal life.
And you've mentioned your mom. How did your family
Mhm.
react to your coming out as trans instead of as a gay boy?
So my mom was very confused because she didn't know what trans was, but she was surprisingly, my mom was actually really supportive of me no matter what. She did not want any permanent changes to start out, so she wasn't fully in support of the hormones or anything, which we can talk more about in a minute. The rest of my family thought that the rest of my family was far more accepting of me as a trans girl than as a gay boy. They the rest of my family were not supportive of homosexuality. Many of them were religious and had religious reasons. Some of them were not religious and just did not care for gay people. Like growing up, if like The Birdcage with Robin Williams came on or some gay show, they would have to change it, and it would be this whole rant on how, insert F slur are taking over society. Um, so to them, the idea that I had a biologically female brain and a male body was far more appealing because it would make me more like heterosexual. Especially if I transitioned medically and presented as female, then I wouldn't draw as much shame to the family in their eyes. They were far more supportive of my, transition and very supportive of my medicalization, because of that.
You went to the clinic at the age of 13, and the gender therapist said some things that sound unbelievable to normal people who don't know this is real. People who hear about this secondhand from me will say, no way. But actually, your story is not the worst I've heard. You're just one person who's willing to discuss what happened. And
Mhm.
that's not so common. Talk about this gender therapist and this doctor. You used the letters W and F for them in your testimony. So we're not going to name these people here, but they actually said you had an inborn essence of a female, like you were being recruited by a cult. Talk about that.
Well, so the gender therapist was more about the essence, but my endocrinologist gave a more biological explanation to it. He said it was to do with a delayed release of testosterone in the womb. So my brain had continued to feminize where my body would have masculinized later. Um, which, made sense to me because I didn't have a biology class at the time. I was only in seventh grade. And my mom, bless her, but she's not very educated in this stuff, so it was very easy to, manipulate. But, you know, the therapist so I found her website not long ago, and apparently she just writes letters for people to just be affirmed. So when I came into her office, it was like they separated me from my mom, and I went and sat with her first, and we had a long discussion. It was, well over an hour. It was a very long talk about, my religious hangups around liking boys, how I was just starting to hit puberty, so I was like I wasn't fully in puberty yet. I must have been a late bloomer, because I was 13, but I still wasn't I don't know how to say, I wasn't doing what, like, a lot of 13-year-old males are doing at that age, if you know what I mean. I was just this innocent little kid that knew I liked boys and knew this feeling was getting stronger. And it was very scary for me because I thought that this thing was shameful. And they just affirmed all of that. I had fears around growing into this shameful thing. And would my family accept me? Would the wider world accept me? Would my God accept me? I had fears around if the gay community would accept me because my whole life I've been bullied for the way that I talk, the way that I walked, just like my interests, just the general way that I carried and expressed myself. Um, I'd faced so much scrutiny for. Um, and that was what the therapist had kind of focused in on. She was like, "Oh, yeah, I could absolutely see how you came to that conclusion, and, you're right, gay men tend to want men, like manly men." Um, and through this discussion, she had essentially well, not even she literally just affirmed all of my insecurities, my doubts, my fears with growing up, and presented transitioning like it was a way out. They brought up puberty blockers and how that could just be a pause in time, but it would really benefit me to start hormones because I could, pass better. And the better I passed, the prettier I would be. The prettier you are, it's easier to find a partner and easier to fly under the radar and not be seen as a freak, essentially. Um, or that was how I had talked about it and how I had received it, um, in her office. And it was only that one appointment that, had gotten me the referral to an endocrinologist who the gender therapist was there for my first appointment with him. And it was the same thing. He just affirmed all of my insecurities. He presented himself as gay. So my mom and I, of course, asked him like what his life was like as a gay man. And he got offended and was like, well, being gay and being trans are two very different things. And that's when he had a whiteboard in the room on like these like rolly wheels, one of these mobile boards, and he did a demonstration talking about how all embryos start out as female and it's actually a release of testosterone in the womb that masculinizes an embryo. So when you're trans, he said that the brain forms first before the body of the embryo. So if there was a delayed release of testosterone, then my brain would have feminized, and then when my body was developing is when it got testosterone, so my body masculinized. So therefore, he explained, "I'm not gay, I literally have a brain in the wrong body. And because of that, if I didn't transition as soon as possible, I would be miserable and dysphoric my entire life. I wouldn't pass. I would get hairy and my face would change and distort, and I would just look hideous, essentially, and my life would be miserable. And he had told my mom in front of me that 60% of trans kids kill themselves because of this. So essentially, I was getting the message that if I went through my normal male puberty, I would be so miserable and so unlovable and face so much prejudice and discrimination that most people, more than half, end up killing themselves rather than face that. So I got this message that male puberty was just the worst thing imaginable. In that appointment is what started me on hormones. I got my prescription from that one appointment.
So you had one appointment with the therapist, and then you had one appointment with the clinician, the doctor, and then you were straight to hormones, because this is, of course, what we are told does not happen. This never, ever, ever happens. There's all this very careful, careful, careful work that goes before they give you hormones, but that is not true in your case. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we thought that that was going to be true because that was the whole point of my family friend giving us a referral. She was like, I can't tell you if this is right or wrong for you, but these are the professionals and they'll be able to offer you therapy to see if this is right for you or not. So my family friend had good intentions referring me there because she thought, oh, these people are the professionals. They'll know, they'll do their job. But yeah, it only took one appointment and they completely speed ran me into it. They actually had a percentage scale for like gender dysphoria. Let me see if I can pull that up on my end and I can tell you because there's like this percentage, it's like 7 to 60 or something for your level of gender dysphoria, and they said I scored a 53 on there. So to them, I was just this classic case of, early onset gender dysphoria, and to them, that's why they claimed I warranted immediate treatment. And that first appointment is when they brought up fertility preservation. And I had denied it because you know, and I guess I can be frank because, quite frankly, I'm already out here talking about my personal business, but, I wasn't even having erections yet. So, the idea of saving sperm, I really didn't even know what sperm was. I hadn't had, like, biology or sex ed yet because I was in a Christian private school. Um so I had no reference for what they were talking about, and they also brought up the idea of, well, if you ever want kids, you could always just adopt, which, sounded just fine, um, at least at the time. So I opted not to save any. I don't even know if I could have because I wasn't having erections yet. Um, so I didn't even know how to, like, go about that, but anyways, yeah, so I was started out on spironolactone for a couple of weeks first because they want to, like, get your androgens under control before they introduce estrogen, or at least they did in my case, and, it was giving me fainting spells because I was on far too high of a dose for my body weight. And it was causing, like, pain in my sides, and I was beginning to have, accidents, like, I was peeing myself sometimes, I was losing control in that regard. Um, but it wasn't so bad yet that, it was, like, dissuading me from the medication, if that makes sense. It was just different than what I had been experiencing prior. So they halved my dose of Spiro. I was to cut the pills in half and only take half. Um, and I was introduced to estrogen a few weeks later. Um, and that did not have immediate side effects. I started having mild hot flashes, and of course, my chest got sore as I started growing breasts and things of that variety. My fainting spells were still not happening as often, but they were still a thing when I was on Spyro. I would just get very dizzy, and sometimes I would faint, or I was having, like, dribbling accidents. So they were pushing for the puberty blocker, which spironolactone can be it's a testosterone blocker. So if you're given it before puberty, it does and you're a male, it does act as a puberty blocker because it blocks your testosterone. But given my body was not reacting very well to the spironolactone, they were pushing for a implant in my arm it's on its website, it's called Suprelin LA, but the actual serum is called hysterelin acetate. Um, and that's what I ended up getting in January of 2017. So I started hormones sometime around July or August of 2016, and then I got my implant in January of 2017. Um, and that came with the most side effects, I would say. My hot flashes got a lot worse. I had a loss of appetite. Like when I would eat, I would feel extremely nauseous. My urinary incontinence got much worse. I was having full on accidents on this stuff with like no ability or control to hold it. I started having extreme muscle spasms, horrific muscle spasms, very painful. Uh, Around this time, my body had also tried to start doing its male things, which did not last very long because erections were extremely painful. And when I brought all of this up to my doctor, he never really had any concern about it. He always just brushed it off like it couldn't be related to the meds or, you know, he never had concern about it. And many years later, after I was detransitioning and I had received my records, I had come to find out that none of my side effects whatsoever were documented. Um, Save for hematuria, I started peeing blood when I was on the blocker, and my mom had taken me to another hospital for a surgery in regards to that, so he had to document. But he said it only lasted 2 weeks and resolved itself, which was a lie. It lasted for months, um, and didn't resolve until blocker was finally taken out. Um, so yeah, he showed no concern for me, a total disregard and a lack of care, and he actively lied in my records and did not document these symptoms, and he documented that I was perfectly happy and healthy in my transition.
Oh, this last 7 years, this medicalization. And what are these years like? You're supposed to be turning into an adult. You're supposed to be transitioning, to use a word, from little Johnny to big Johnny. So, what was happening to you during this crucial phase of your development? Did you ever go out on a date? Did you ever go to prom? Did you have anything like a normal adolescence? Did you get good grades? Just how did your adolescence stack up to other kids?
Yeah, well, none of that happened. My development was arrested. The doctor discouraged me from going to public school because he said I would be bullied. But my mom eventually enrolled me anyways. So I started high school in the ninth grade. Um, and I was bullied really intensely. I was because being trans was now a big thing in the culture. So like kids would throw cans and rotten food at me and be like, there are only two genders. So I didn't have a lot of friends. I was also having pervasive medical issues when I was in school, like my muscle spasms. There were times I'd be walking down the hallway and I would just collapse because my legs would start spasming. And I would be in pain and nobody would believe me. They just thought I was trying to get out of class, or I was having accidents in class. I had incontinence, but I was also on blockers and peeing blood in the ninth grade. So I would, wet blood into my pants. And my school would insist that I'm just doing it to get out of class, because they never checked. So they never checked me for blood. They just saw that I wet myself and I claimed I had an accident, and they would be like, "You're just doing that on purpose." Um, I had, fluid leakage coming out of my breasts. And my doctor told me that that was lactation, but, that was never a satisfying answer because I wasn't pregnant, of course. But it was so much that I was getting spots on the outside of my shirts. Like it would soak through my bras sometimes, or I would just have this like sticky, gross fluid that would fill up my bra or soak through my shirts if I wasn't wearing one. It was really terrible. I became very distressed about my sexual function as well during this time because, of course, my friends were starting to experiment and go out on dates and go to prom and things of that variety, and I wasn't able to do any of that because my development was arrested. So, even the few times that I did try to explore my physical function, it was very painful. It felt like if any blood had flowed down to my, areas, it felt like they became filled with broken glass and needles. It was just this sharp, agonizing pain. Um, so yeah, I didn't go out on dates, I didn't go to prom, I didn't have any of the normal milestones. I was in and out of school a lot. I ended up having to leave freshman year, um, because I was in so much pain and agony, and I was having so many medical issues, and just nobody believed me. So it was showing a massive impact on my grades. So I dropped out freshman year. My mom pushed to get the blocker removed. My hematuria eventually resolved itself. Um, and I was back on Spyro, and I believe that my if I have my timeline correct, I would need to look at my records, but my doctor had also added progesterone sometime in there. Because he told me it would reduce my risk of cancer, but what he put in the records was that it would give me more curves. Um, which I had never asked for, but whatever. Um, so yeah, I completely missed out on all of the normal milestones. I had tried to re-enter high school sophomore year, but my school kind of was pushing me to be their token trans child. Like I wasn't allowed to take the extracurriculars I wanted. They wanted me in the GSA advocating for trans stuff. They tried to dictate what bathrooms I could use. Like I always used the nurse's restroom my whole life, and they eventually stopped giving me the key to it because they wanted me using the girls' room, and it just became too overwhelming of a battle. I wasn't comfortable with any of this. I just wanted to be myself and fly under the radar and not make anyone uncomfortable because that makes me uncomfortable. Um, and they just never respected that. So I ended up leaving sophomore year to get my GED, of which it took me 5 years to actually accomplish, just because I had medical issues and, of course, from having my whole development messed with and the trajectory it sent me down in life, um, I had depression and emotional issues. I never got better from this being done to me. It really just made my life very, very difficult. So, yeah, I didn't actually complete high school until just this last year when I finally got my GED.
They locked your growth plates, your bone growth plate. Take a minute and talk about that, if you would, please.
It was in March of, I believe it was 2017, it might have been 2018. I would have to go back and look at my records, because it's such a long period of my life, it's hard to remember the exact dates off the top of my head, but I remember it was in March. And the doctor had projected my height to be between 6'1" and 6'4", and he had discussed with me that if I'm that tall, women don't get that tall, so if I'm that tall, I would never pass, and it would make it extremely difficult for me to find a partner or a husband. Um, because I wouldn't pass, and if you're not passing, then, what's the point? Your life is gonna be so hard, you're gonna be so miserable, everyone's gonna know you're a man, and that discussion had made me very distressed about my height. Um, he had taken to measure me and, like they do in the doctor's office, and I remember him specifically pulling up a chair because he was very short. He pulled up a chair and climbed in the chair to measure me just to make me feel like I was freakishly tall. Um, and I know that sounds ridiculous to some people, but this is, like, legitimately what he did, and it worked because I was 14, so it made me feel I was 14, I was already insecure about everything about my appearance, and very concerned with what my future would look like. So, being made to feel like I was so much taller than a grown man, and I'm just gonna be freakishly tall if I become, 6'1", 6'2", or taller, that was very distressing for me. So he had upped my estrogen, quite a bit to, fuse my growth plates, and it's a painless process for them to fuse. It usually happens naturally into your 20s. Um, but, since my growth was stunted and I'm 5'8", but since I've gone off of everything, I have these growths that are showing up in my joints. Like, I have one in my right foot that's about the size of a golf ball. It's as big as my ankle, and those ache, and they seem to be appearing where my bones connect. Because I have one in the back of my head, I have one on my chest where all my ribs conjoin, and I've not been able to find an explanation since other than just these growths are normal bone, so I potentially relate it to him stunning my growth. I could be incorrect, but yeah, he stunted my growth essentially because if you're too tall, you don't pass and you're not desirable to men.
What made you realize that transition was a lie? How did you find your way out of the madness? Because too many children never do. So talk about that.
That's a great question, and to be honest with you, I don't think I ever would have if I was seeing a new doctor many years later because my first endocrinologist that started me on this path saw me up until I was 17, and I was going through an identity crisis at the time because I was so sick, like, I cannot communicate to you guys, and I know, like, maybe not everyone gets this sick from these treatments, but I was so sick. I felt like a cancer patient. Like, I couldn't build any muscle. I wasn't able to put on weight. I was wetting myself all the time, complete sexual dysfunction, fluid coming out of my chest. I wasn't getting any explanations anywhere. Um, when I would try to date, I was only attracting like older men that liked young, like lady boys or young boys. It was a very miserable time. And I called that doctor I was texting him and he called me and I was like, you said none of this would ever happen. And he hung up on me on that phone call, as a result. And I had never heard from him again. So my mom found me a new endocrinologist who I started seeing when I was 18. I was still on the hormones this whole time, like my prescriptions kept coming in. Um, so I saw this new endocrinologist and I saw her for a few years, still miserable. I was sobbing in her office just about every appointment, and she'd be adjusting my hormones all the time, trying to figure out what was going on or why I was so sick. I was also her youngest patient she'd ever had on this path. Like, she had a few transgender adults, but no one that had started nearly as young as I was. So she was a little bit shocked. And finally, in December of 2023, she said, "Well, maybe it's time for you to just take a break and see what happens." Because we weren't getting any answers as to why I was so sick. I'm just very depressed. This stuff hasn't benefited my life in any way. and she was like, "Maybe you just need to take a break and see what happens." Um, which I freaked out at because I was still under the impression that I had a brain condition and I needed all of this. So, but I listened and I started to wean off of the hormones. I would sometimes freak myself out and take them like a dose here or there, but I was weaning off. And it wasn't until the WPATH files came out, I'd overheard an interview, with Michael Schellenberger on the news, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, WPATH, I've heard that name before, I've seen that name on my paperwork." So, I look it up, and I find the WPATH files, and I start reading into that, and of course, there are some aspects of it that even still I don't quite understand, but enough of it was clear enough to me that these doctors did not have concern for their patients and were knowingly leading people into this. It was the callousness that these doctors had shown that really reminded me of my doctor, like the lack of concern, the casually talking about permanent infertility and things of that variety. The eunuch files and the eunuch chapter, all of that made me very sick, and it reminded me of discussions I had had with providers, and it felt like my whole world came crashing down, but I you know, that's really ripped the veil off of my eyes, I guess. Um, Both that and I have a lot of friends in real life, who either were transitioned as minors and went through surgery, and it did not go as the community told us it would go. Like, they had severe complications from having their puberty blocked, or I've had friends, like my friend that had referred me to the hospital originally, who passed away on the hormones from heart issues or kidney issues. Um So it was a combination of losing a lot of people, seeing the long-term consequences firsthand of blocking puberty and continuing to transition into adulthood. Um, like the effects that the hormones had and the complications from surgery, from not having enough tissue, et cetera, et cetera. And then my own experience of just becoming very ill and being lied to so much, and then seeing those files, seeing that, "Oh, this is a thing that has happened all over the world," and that led me just down this rabbit hole of research, and I had found out that the whole brain in the wrong body theory, the bioessentialist theory, wasn't based in any science whatsoever. It's just a theory. Um So all of these things combined just shattered the lies I was sold, because that's what I feel like. I feel like I was sold a lie, um, that this would benefit me, and it did not benefit me in any way.
You recently got a chance to share your story with Scott Wiener. You testified against SB 943, a bill that would attempt to circumvent the recent Supreme Court ruling against bans on so-called conversion therapy. And of course, conversion therapy is someone saying, "Hey, Johnny, you're actually a boy in a boy's body." That's supposed to be conversion therapy. So what Wiener and the Democrats of California are doing, in plain words, is trying to pass legislation to make it illegal for a doctor to tell you the truth about yourself. They have to lie to you.
My name is Jonni Skinner. I'm here representing GenSpect. When I was young, I was a feminine child, and I discovered trans influencers online. They said, change your body and your life gets better, don't and it gets worse. Or as my doctors told my mom, I would commit suicide. The medical and mental health providers didn't bother to ask why I felt the way I did. They poisoned my body with blockers and hormones, arresting my puberty and messing with my development. The result? I'm a 23-year-old gay man who's never had an orgasm and may never experience one. Let that sink in. I was rendered anorgasmic because once you say you could be trans, that's it. Full stop. No exploration as to why is allowed, even if you are a struggling kid. The former president of WPATH, Dr. Marcy Bowers, a California surgeon who had performed the surgery for Jazz Jennings at 17, admitted on video that puberty blockers followed by cross-sex hormones results in no orgasms and stunted genitals. SB 934 guarantees that more people will end up like me, the walking but wounded. I could have been spared all of this if any of my therapists would have explored why I felt dysphoric, but they never did. They only led me to hate my body more. The Supreme Court just ruled in a rare bipartisan decision that laws like this are unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination. This bill is an attempted workaround that will be used to silence therapists who could have helped me avoid the irreversible harms to my body and the loss of my sexual function, as is the same for many others. So today I ask you to extend some empathy to survivors like me and vote no for this bill. Thank you.
All right. Others.
And Scott Wiener seemed very uncomfortable while you were talking. We can't read too much into body language, but it definitely looked to me like your story affected him in some way that other detransition stories have not. So what was your impression?
Um, well, definitely saw him shifting a bit, and I felt like he was shooting me dagger eyes, to be honest, but I'm not a body language expert. Um, he went on in the rest of the hearing to discuss that because one of the legislatures had asked him if harm like ours would be considered under his bill as gender identity change efforts. And he said no, that situations like mine would be held under the same standard medical malpractice laws. So I don't think my story affected him as much as people believe that it did. I'm just out here as a male, and it's pretty obvious. There are people out here who will deny that this has happened to me because I'm not pretty enough for them. But it's pretty obvious that my puberty or my hormones were messed with in some way, just with the way that I'm built, the way that I sound. It's pretty obvious. And I think that that makes people that push these procedures very uncomfortable. On top of that, it makes them uncomfortable because most of the information that I'm sure he's getting from people that transitioned as adults who will naturally have a very different experience on these medications than somebody who transitioned as a minor. And these adults often do not want people like myself speaking out because they feel like it invalidates their story or whatever. Um, so in my mind, in my perception, I saw him shifting because he just wasn't planning on somebody being so candid and honest about the harms caused. And I don't think that it helps that I'm a very liberal person myself. So it's not like these politicians can just claim that I'm transphobic or whatever because I'm genuinely not. Um, so that presents a problem for their narrative.
There are long-term consequences for your life, and I'm not just talking about your sex life, your entire life. And at Gen Spec, I heard Excellensic giving you advice about your bone plate issues, which she also has those. Have you found the detransition community helpful and supportive in dealing with these issues? I mean, have you found community there?
I've met a lot of really good people that I consider friends, like Excellensic, I consider a friend. I consider you a friend. Unfortunately, this stuff does have such long-lasting, serious consequences that we need proper authorities to actually pay attention and help. And in my case, although I've made friends with a lot of detransitioners and they've tried to help me find a doctor, who will, like take a biopsy of my bones and see what's going on. They've tried to help me find legal representation, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any of that wider support that would actually benefit me in a tangible way. Um, so yes and no. I mean, on some level there is community, but on a deeper level where it would actually make a larger difference, I don't feel like I have anything, you know.
It sounds like you found people who share this with you, and unfortunately, the rest of society is not prepared to accept any of you. You're not the only detransitioner who has complained about this, about how the professions just don't seem to want to put up with them at all, don't want to deal with them. How has this affected your relationships with family? I ask because I don't think I've ever seen an ideology that was so good at destroying families. I know your mother is still very supportive. How is your relationship with the rest of your family?
Other than my mother and one of her cousins who I consider my aunt, I'm completely estranged from the rest of my family. When I was trying to find a lawyer to sue the people that did this to me. Of course, I wasn't able to find one. There are lawyers helping other detransitioners, but I've been given a lot of reasons, and quite frankly, we're all just as far out of the statute as each other. So just no one wanted to help me, um, for different reasons. But upon them learning that I was detransitioning and wanting to be a gay man, and especially talking about the homophobia and the bullying that they inflicted on me as a young kid, none of them wanted to admit to that. They thought that me transitioning, they could just, like, prop me up and be like, "Oh, look, we're supportive," and they thought they could just leave behind that era of extreme homophobia. And with me detransitioning and wanting to talk about it, they were very not happy with that, and they became very accusatory and they became very nasty, and I lost my family, for trying to be honest and tell the truth, or seeking redress for what was done to me. They were not supportive in the slightest. Just my mom and my aunt.
While I was preparing this interview, it occurred to me that you and I have been in this fight for almost exactly the same amount of time, a decade. Right when you were being medicalized, I was leaving the Democratic Party. I was at the height of my powers. I might have been able to pull a six-figure income, but I left because I objected to what was happening to you at the same time, even though I didn't know you. So, from my perspective, your experience, which is awful and should never happen, it sadly validates my choice at the same time. So, looking back from a decade away, what kind of care do you wish you had received instead of what you got?
That's a great question. I wish that they used the watch and wait model instead of the affirmative model. I wish that instead of affirming all of my insecurities, all of my feelings of self-hatred, all of my internalized homophobia, my body dysmorphia, I wish instead of affirming all of that and promising transition as a way out, I wish they actually took the time to explore the underlying causes of my distress with me. I wish that my doctors had taken the time to introduce me to more positive gay role models. I feel like that would have helped me come to accept who I was maturing into much more, instead of dissuading me from that. Um, I wish that yeah, I wish that they had offered me that kind of, exploratory therapy. Like, I wish that they supported me in dressing however I want, expressing myself however I want, but I wish that they had helped me build confidence in myself, and maybe I wouldn't have felt like I needed, hormones and surgery to be acceptable or to be lovable.
Do you have a vision for your future, an idea of who you want to be when you grow up, so to speak? I'm not being facetious because some people don't figure themselves out until 35. Uh,
Yeah.
had have you got a good sense of who you are and what you will become now?
I mean, yeah, but also no, because, I have a vision of what I want out of my life, and I very much know who I am. But with everything I've lost to this transition, to be honest, I don't know if it's possible for me to achieve what I would like in life. My bone issues are still getting worse. I still have urinary incontinence. Um, I still have other dysfunctions. I'm kind of in agony from all of this. I feel trapped in my body, but in an entirely different way now than I did originally. Um, so I don't know what my life will look like. When I was younger and I got caught up into this, I really just wanted to find a partner and be able to have a family. Um, which I know sounds stupid and, not of meaning or value to a lot of people, but that was just genuinely what I wanted. And I don't know if that's possible now. Um, just because of the changes that were done to my body before I was an adult. So I don't know what my life will look like. Um, I've lost my health and my family, and I've lost a lot of friends. I've lost jobs, opportunities. I actually worry a lot for what my long-term future will look like. Because right now I'm supported by some great people, but after all of this scandal is over, I don't know what my future will look like. Um, I know what I wanna go to school for, but that doesn't guarantee me a satisfactory life, personally, if you know what I mean. So, I I don't know, that's a long-winded answer, but that's it's an honest one. I really don't know what my long-term future will look like. I will probably, because no one wanted to help me with a lawsuit, I'll probably be struggling with health issues and pain and financial issues, quite frankly, because I lost my support system, um, probably for the rest of my life because of this. Um, you know, uh, I hope that some people get justice, but not all of us were given that opportunity to see that. And that does carry long-term impacts when, the justice system is unfair like that.
What, if anything, would you like the audience to know that they're not thinking about now, that they haven't heard? Is there anything that you think we're not talking about that we need to talk about?
Too often, I hear people getting caught up in the identity, like, semantics of it all, and I feel like that is not I mean, it's an important factor in this discussion, but honestly, I feel like it's also with as much as people focus on it, I feel like it's almost a waste of breath. It would be much easier to just, 'cause as a 13-year-old, I did not have the life experience to be able to envision myself into the future. You know what I mean? I couldn't even conceptualize of myself as a gay man yet because I never had the opportunity to live as one. And that's the case for all of these kids. A middle schooler, an elementary schooler, a middle schooler, even a high schooler has not had the life experience to be able to conceptualize of what they want for themselves in the long term. And I feel like that point alone needs to be focused on more that, these are kids and it's very disturbing, um, not even just that this happened to me and so many people I know, but just as an adult to see so many people talk about cosmetic surgery for kids as if it's just like just a casual thing. And then I often see the backlash to that as people discussing these kids' internal identities. Well, no, we just need to focus on these are kids. They have not had the lived experience to know themselves to be making these permanent decisions. And it's never okay to take a teenager who is in distress and tell them surgery or hormones is the only way out of that. I could not think of a more toxic, horrific thing to tell a child or a teenager in distress. I truly can't. Like, you're in pain. The only way to get out of that is to change your body to be acceptable or to be lovable. I wish that more people had discussed these things in that light because that's really what this whole medical scandal centers around is it's taking advantage of kids in all sorts of distressful situations and telling them that they need to change their bodies in order to escape that or in order to feel normal or to appear normal. And there truly just is not a worse thing to tell a child. It's criminal.
Johnny, thank you so much for your courage and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the full podcast. The Distance is an encampment for everyone made politically homeless by gender ideology. Visit our website at www.thedistancemag.com to support our work with a monthly or annual premium subscription.